So what I'm up to in this video is I want to share with you some of the ideas that I have been saving up for my own team members that we may turn into informative or persuasive speeches. And in future videos, I'll come back and I'll have some tips for some of the limited prep events. But there are three ideas that I've stumbled across in the last few months that I think would make really good informative speeches, or in your case, expository speeches. I haven't thought that much about the angle for visual aids, but that just means there's an opportunity for you to get nice and creative. One of the things that I came across was there have been some new discoveries in the area of how honeybees communicate with one another inside the hive. And so maybe you could have a really good expository about bee communication. And you can start off with what a lot of people are sort of familiar with, the honeybee dance. How when a particular worker bee finds a source of nectar, they'll go back to the hive and they'll do a dance that shows the other honeybees where it is, what direction it's in, and how far away it is. Now that's something that the odds are pretty good your judge has heard of in the past, but some research done in just the past few years has added to it some other ways that messages get sent between honeybees inside the hive, and some of them are challenging some of the things we thought about how a beehive works. A couple of scientists by the name of Stanley Schneider, he's actually a professor, and Andrew Pierce, who did this research when he was in college. He was a college student. He was an honors student. And this is pretty impressive for a college student to have discovered. They're both at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. And what they found was there are a couple of movements that bees do to signal to one another that it may be time to split the hive, to go out and colonize a new hive. One of them, a bee will grab another bee and will shake it and vibrate it back and forth. And sometimes, well, I'm getting a little ahead of myself. The second movement is called piping. And it's something that it's a little bit different and sends a subtly different message. I was actually thinking in the direction of visual aids, and you can get on some online stores like Nature Pavilion, for example, and they will sell you a 6-inch long model of a honeybee, and you could actually demonstrate what these movements look like. What was surprising about the research, and this actually made the news, this particular breakthrough, we like to think that in honeybees, the queen is the one who's the decision maker, and that's actually why we call it the queen. But what Pierce and Schneider discovered through their study of what went on in beehives was the decision when it's time to go out and colonize a new hive is not made by the queen. Those movements are not initiated in that process. They don't get the ball rolling by the queen's decision. Instead, some of the older worker bees, they will start with the vibration movement and the piping movement, and the queen will adjust her behavior in response. She becomes more active. She may go out and fly more. She moves around the hive more, and she loses weight through this and becomes more able to travel. So, some of their conclusions, they say that we may need to reconsider how decentralized decision-making is in a life form that we previously thought of as a hive mentality. That the queen is not running it, the workers are not all the queen's surrogates, and so forth. So that could make kind of a cool little speech. Second possibility. There is a researcher by the name of Dennis Hong at Virginia Tech University, and he's a researcher into robotics. And one of the neatest things that I have read about that he is working on is with robots, the trick is always how do you get them to move and how do you deal with the limitations of movement. If you have a robot whose movement mechanism kind of replicates animals and humans, and it has legs and feet, well, it can get toppled over, and there are all kinds of complications. The parts are very hard to replace. Well, Dennis Hong had this lateral thinking moment, this almost breakthrough, and what he's working on now, and this is very different from what most people are doing in the robotics field these days, he's working on making robots that move like amoebas, and they actually develop pseudopods. And he's looking at designing things that are almost like a water snake, like the toy that you can get where the thing just seems to slip through your hands. And so what his applications, the things that he thinks he's going to be able to do with these things, he can make very small amoeba robots that propel themselves just completely differently from other models of robots that people have been working on for the past several generations. These things, we may be able to use them inside the body. They may be able to move through people's bloodstream and clear blocked arteries. So you might look into that and see what are the possibilities, what are the latest developments when it comes to amoeba robots. And I think that could make a really cool speech with some really cool visuals. Maybe you can even take a water snake and generate with a movement, or demonstrate what the movement would be like. Third and final possibility. This one I think is quite cool. For a lot of types of alternative energy source, whether it's solar, whether it's wind power, one of the big obstacles that's getting in the way is you need a storage battery. The wind isn't always blowing, and the sun isn't always out. So during times of peak generation, you need to store up all that. You need to store up all that power. And because you can't control sources like that, you can't turn them on when you need them. You need the power there for times when there's peak demand. Well, there's a proposal that a professor by the name of William Kempton at the University of Delaware has been working on, and he calls it V2G, Vehicle to Grid. And one of the directions that a lot of innovation is moving toward in the automobile industry is plug-in hybrids. Cars that either don't need gasoline at all, or maybe just need gasoline for a backup engine, just in case you run out of electricity. But the way the car operates, it operates by battery, and the way the battery is recharged is you take it and you plug it in. Currently, we already have Priuses available, where as you drive, the gasoline motor is always available to charge the battery back up. But these would go even further, and the chief source of powering would be to have the car plugged in. Now, something interesting happens if you're taking your car and you're plugging in. The first thing is, the average automobile user has their car plugged in 23 hours a day. So it just sits there. Well, if it's going to sit there plugged into the grid, Kempton's idea is it could actually serve to store the power that's being generated by solar and wind and other forms of generation that we don't have any control over. And the owner of the car could actually get paid for that, could charge rent to have their car serve as a storage battery. And if we have every car, or almost every car, that is plugged into the grid serving as individual little storage batteries, then our storage capacity is absolutely enormous. So, you ought to investigate that, because I can just imagine what the visuals would be, demonstrating the grid, showing plug-in hybrids and so forth, and explaining what a breakthrough this could be. And because it's a win-win situation, it would make some of these alternative energy sources finally economically viable, and the people who own the cars would get a check in the mail for renting their battery to the grid every month.